They said the doll only whispers when the house is silent. But what it says, it's not meant for anyone's ears. Stay till the twist. Nathan's first night in the dilapidated mansion was heavy with the scent of mildew and rot. The ancient house, inherited from his uncle, loomed with a malevolent presence in the dense woods of Maine. It had been unoccupied for decades, left to the mercy of wind and water, but it was now his. The air inside was thick, stale, and unwelcoming. He had arrived late in the evening, the sun barely peeking over the distant pines. He carried a small suitcase and a lantern, the only source of light. His boots crunched on the dirt path as he approached the house, each step echoing like a warning. The key turned with a reluctant groan, and the door swung open to reveal darkness so complete it swallowed him whole. Inside, the mansion was a labyrinth of dusty hallways and closed doors. He moved cautiously, his lantern flickering, shadows dancing around him like silent specters. The furniture was draped in white sheets, resembling the ghosts of the past. A cold draft moved through the rooms, rattling the glass in the windows and making him shiver. Nathan found a bedroom on the second floor that seemed the least hostile. He stripped the sheet from the bed and lay down, exhausted from the journey. But sleep did not come easily. The creaks and groans of the house were alive, each sound feeding the anxiety in his chest. The darkness pressed in on him, suffocating and absolute. Just before dawn, he woke with a start. His heart thudded in his chest, and he struggled to remember where he was. In the gloom, he saw something on the dresser across the room. It hadn't been there when he arrived. It was a doll, propped up against the mirror. Porcelain face cracked and dirt-streaked. Its glass eyes stared unblinking into his soul. Nathan sat up, squinting at it. He felt a sudden chill, as though the temperature in the room had dropped 10 degrees. He approached the dresser, the lantern's light trembling. The doll was ancient, wearing a faded sailor suit that had once been blue, but was now a murky gray. Its mouth was slightly open, as if caught in mid-whisper. He reached out and touched it. The porcelain was cold, and the sensation of it against his fingertips sent a shiver down his spine. He couldn't remember bringing the doll into the room. Had it always been there? No, he was sure of it. He'd inspected the room carefully. He would have seen it. He lifted the doll and turned it over. There was no maker's mark, no hint of its origins. Just that cracked, eerie face and its dead stare. Unease settled in his stomach, but he set the doll back down and tried to shake, off the feeling. It was just a doll. It couldn't harm him. The morning light did little to dispel the darkness that had settled in the mansion. Nathan spent the day exploring the house, trying to get his bearings. Each room was a time capsule, untouched by the years. Dust lay thick on every surface, and cobwebs draped from the ceilings like funeral shrouds. He found the library first, a cavernous room filled with moldering books. He ran his fingers along the spines, feeling the history in each brittle page. The titles were faded, the leather bindings cracked and decaying. There was something comforting in the smell of old paper, something familiar in the chaos of the shelves. In the dining room, a massive table stood beneath a chandelier of tarnished brass. He imagined the meals that had been served there, the laughter and conversation that had once filled the air. Now only silence remained. The kitchen was a tomb of rusted utensils and broken dishes. The sink was filled with stagnant water, the kioi, stench of decay rising from the drain. Nathan wrinkled his nose and backed away. He avoided the basement door. It stood at the end of the hallway, the wood swollen and cracked, the lock rusted in place. Something about it felt wrong, a sense of dread that made his skin crawl. He would leave it for another day. That night, as he lay in bed, the whispering began. At first he thought it was the wind, a faint susurration, like leaves rustling or water trickling in the distance. But the more he listened, the more he realized it was a voice, soft, insistent, just at the edge of hearing. He sat up, heart pounding. The lantern on the bedside table flickered, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. The doll was still there, sitting on the dresser, its mouth open in that eternal whisper. He strained to hear, the voice growing clearer. It was speaking words he couldn't quite make out, a language he didn't recognize. The cadence was hypnotic, each syllable drawing him deeper into the darkness. Nathan tried to shake it off, telling himself it was a dream. He closed his eyes and covered his ears, but the whispering grew louder, closer. It was in the room with him, crawling under his skin, worming its way into his mind. He leapt from the bed and grabbed the doll. Its eyes seemed to glimmer in the lantern light, and he felt a surge of revulsion. He carried it to the window and threw it out into the night, hearing it thump onto the ground below. Silence returned. The whispering ceased, and he let out a shuddering breath. He crawled back into bed, exhausted, and finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. Morning brought no relief. When he went outside to retrieve the doll, it was gone. The ground was undisturbed, the grass wet with dew. Nathan searched the area, but there was no sign of it. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, a trick of the light and the darkness. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Days passed in a haze of unease. The mansion pressed in on him, each creaking floorboard a reminder of his isolation. He tried to keep busy, cleaning the rooms, restoring what he could. But at night, the whispering returned. He would wake to find the doll back on the dresser, its cracked face leering at him. Each time he threw it out, it reappeared by morning, silent but ever present. The whispering grew clearer, the words slipping into his dreams like poison. He began to hear it even during the day, a soft murmur beneath the sound of the wind. The voice was patient, coaxing, weaving itself into his thoughts. He stopped sleeping, afraid of what he might hear if he closed his eyes. The lines between waking and dreaming blurred, and he felt himself slipping. One night, driven by a desperate need for answers, he took the doll in his hands and demanded it speak to him. "What do you want?" he hissed, shaking it. "What are you?" The doll's mouth did not move, but the whispering grew louder. He heard his name in that voice, heard secrets he had never spoken aloud. It told him of the house's past, of the tragedies that had unfolded within these walls. It spoke of his uncle, who had gone mad in this place, driven to the brink by the same voice that now plagued Nathan. The more he listened, the more he understood. The doll was a vessel, a conduit for the house itself. It fed on loneliness, on fear and desperation. It whispered promises of understanding, of revelation. All he had to do was listen. Nathan found himself obeying. He would sit in the dark, the doll on his lap, listening to its voice. The words were soothing, filling the emptiness inside him. He stopped leaving the house, stopped caring for himself. He let the house close in around him, surrendering to its embrace. His reflection in the cracked mirror was a stranger. Hollow eyes, sunken cheeks, skin pale and clammy. The man in the glass was a husk, consumed by the house's hunger. One night, he woke to find the doll on his chest, its glass eyes inches from his own. The whispering was deafening, 1,000 voices speaking as one. They spoke of blood, of sacrifice. They told him what he must do to be free. He staggered from the bed, the doll clutched in his hands. He made his way to the basement door, the one he had avoided for so long. The key turned in the lock with a finality that made his breath catch in his throat. The stairs descended into darkness, the air thick with the scent of earth and mold. He carried the lantern, its light barely piercing the gloom. The steps creaked beneath his weight, each one an echo of his heartbeat. At the bottom was a small room, the walls lined with shelves of dusty jars and cracked crockery. In the center of the room was a circle of blackened candles, their wicks long dead. The floor was stained with something dark and dried, a memory of violence. The whispering guided him, told him what he needed to do. He found a knife on one of the shelves, its blade dull with rust. The voice told him to cut, to offer himself to the house. He hesitated, the blade shaking in his hand. He didn't want to die. He didn't want to be another victim of this place. But the whispering was insistent, and he felt his resolve crumbling. He pressed the knife to his palm and drew it across the skin. Blood welled up, dark and glistening. The whispering rose in a crescendo, a chorus of exultation. He let the blood drip onto the floor, onto the candles and the dried stains. The room seemed to shudder, the walls contracting like a living thing. The doll in his other hand was warm, its cracked mouth moving in silent rhythm to the voice in his head. He sank to his knees, the knife slipping from his fingers. The world narrowed to the circle of candles, the blood on the floor, and the whispering. That had become a scream. He thought of his uncle, of the madness that had claimed him. He understood now. The house was a predator, feeding on the minds of those who dared to inhabit it. The doll was its mouthpiece, a siren song that lured men to their doom. Nathan closed his eyes, tears mingling with the blood on his hands, whispered a prayer he no longer believed in, and the house whispered back. He awoke hours later, sprawled on the cold stone floor. The lantern was dark, the air icy and still. The doll lay beside him, its eyes closed as if in sleep. He staggered to his feet, the cut on his palm throbbing. The room was unchanged, but he felt different, hollowed out. He left the basement and returned to the bedroom, the doll cradled in his arms. Days blurred into nights, the whispering never ceasing. Nathan stopped eating, stopped drinking. He existed only to listen, to serve. The house had claimed him, body and soul. He began to see the faces of the others who had come before, pale, translucent figures that flickered at the edge of his vision. They watched him with hollow eyes, their mouths moving in silent mockery of his own whispered prayers. He knew he would join them soon. The house would consume him, as it had consumed them. The doll would find another to whisper to, another mind to devour. In his final days, Nathan wrote down what he could remember. The words spilled from him in a fevered rush, a confession to no one. He filled page after page with the history of the house, the story of the doll. He wrote until his hands shook, until the words blurred on the page. He hid the journal in the library, beneath a loose floorboard. A last act of defiance, a warning for whoever came next. On his last night, he lay in the bed, the doll on his chest. The whispering was no longer a voice, but a presence, filling him completely. He felt himself dissolving, his thoughts scattering, like leaves in the wind. He closed his eyes, surrendering to the darkness. The last thing he heard was the doll's voice, soft and sated. In the silence that followed, the house waited. The last train pulled away, the screech of metal and rattle of wheels swallowed by the encroaching darkness. Thomas stood on the cracked platform, clutching the worn handle of his suitcase, his breath fogging the cold air. "Stay till the twist," he glanced at the rusted sign overhead, its peeling letters spelling out a name he'd never seen on any map. Alder's Hollow. The timetable board was blank, a yellowed relic listing departures that never seemed to arrive. He'd only meant to travel home after his father's funeral, but somewhere along the line, he must have dozed off. When he woke up, this was where he'd arrived. He pulled his coat tighter, eyes sweeping the empty station. A single light flickered above a ticket booth, illuminating an elderly attendant who didn't seem to notice Thomas standing there. Approached, clearing his throat. "Excuse me," he said. "Is there another train coming?" The man didn't look up. His voice was a rasp, thin and hollow. "Another train, boy? Why would there be?" Thomas swallowed. a prickle of unease creeping up his spine. "I need to get back to the city," he said. This station wasn't on the map. I don't even remember getting off here." The attendant's head lifted slowly, eyes milky and unfocused. "You're here now, aren't you?" he said. "That's all that matters." A shiver ran down Thomas's back. He forced a smile. "I'm sure I can catch a cab. There's bound to be a road nearby." The man's lips twitched, almost a smile. "There are no roads from Alder's Hollow," he said. "Just tracks that run nowhere." Thomas felt a cold knot form in his gut. "What do you mean, nowhere?" But the old man only turned away, his shoulders hunching as he resumed counting tickets that no one had bought in decades. Thomas backed away, scanning the platform for any sign of life. The benches were empty, the tracks swallowed by shadow beyond, the faint pool of lamplight. He heard a soft scuffling sound, like footsteps behind him, but when he turned, no one was there. He walked along the edge of the platform, peering into the darkness. "Hello?" he called out. "Is anyone else here?" Silence answered him. He felt the weight of the emptiness press against his chest. His fingers tightened around the suitcase handle until his knuckles ached. He decided to find the station, building. There had to be a phone, or at least a waiting room where he could sit and think. The door creaked open under his hand, revealing a narrow hallway lined with faded posters. Their slogans were cheerful, "Travel with ease," but the edges were curled and brittle, like they'd been left to rot in damp air. Thomas stepped. Inside, the scent of mildew thick in his nose. He found the waiting room, a cramped space with cracked leather seats and a battered coffee machine that hummed with a soft, dead current. A single man sat slumped in the corner, head bowed, eyes hidden by the brim of a stained hat. Thomas hesitated. "Hey," he said softly. "Do you know when the next train's coming?" The man didn't look up. He exhaled a thin stream of smoke from a cigarette that burned down to the filter. "I'm trying to get back to the city," Thomas said. "There's got to be a way out of here." The man lifted his head slowly, revealing a face lined with exhaustion and something else, something hollow. "There's no way out of Alder's Hollow," he said. "You're here because you belong here." Thomas shook his head. "That's crazy. I don't even know this place exists." The man's lips twitched in a humorless smile. "No one does, until they're here." Thomas stepped back, heart pounding. "I'm not staying here," he said, more to himself than to the man. "You think you have a choice?" the man asked. "We all thought that, at first." Thomas turned and fled the room, the man's laughter following him like a chill wind. He pushed open door after door, storerooms filled with broken luggage, stairwells that spiraled down into darkness, offices stacked with mildewed files. Each room felt older, the air thicker, the darkness pressing closer. He found himself in a corridor that ended in a heavy wooden door. A sign above it read, "Maintenance." He pushed it open, the hinges shrieking in protest. Inside, a single bulb flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. A man in a maintenance uniform crouched beside a pile of rusted tools, humming a tuneless song. He didn't look up as Thomas entered. Thomas swallowed. "I'm looking for a way out," he said. "Can you help me?" The man paused his humming, turning to look at Thomas with pale, sunken eyes. "Out?" he said softly. "You're already out." Thomas shook his head. "I don't belong here. I need to leave." The man smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. "You belong, whether you know it or not," he said. "We all do." Thomas backed away, his breath coming faster. He turned and fled down the corridor, the man's laughter echoing after him. He burst back onto the platform, gulping the cold air like water. The station was no less empty. He scanned the tracks, hoping for a distant light, but the darkness seemed endless, swallowing the rails in blackness. He forced himself to walk, feet crunching on gravel, until he reached the end of the platform. Beyond it, the tracks vanished into a tunnel shrouded in mist. He hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, but he stepped forward. The mist closed around him like a shroud, the air damp and heavy. He walked slowly, listening to the echo of his footsteps, the rasp of his breath. Halfway through the tunnel, he heard a voice. "Thomas," it called, low and insistent. "Thomas." He froze, his pulse thundering in his ears. "Who's there?" he demanded. Silence. Then the voice again, closer. "Thomas." He turned, but the tunnel was empty. His suitcase felt like an anchor dragging at his arm. "Who are you?" he shouted. The voice was a whisper now, brushing against his ear. "You know who I am." He dropped the suitcase and ran, feet pounding on the old boards, the mist tearing at his skin. He didn't stop until he stumbled out the other side, gasping for air. The platform on this side was no better, empty, silent, suffocating. A figure stood at the far end, a tall man in a conductor's uniform. His face was obscured by the brim of his hat, but Thomas could feel his gaze, heavy and cold. "You shouldn't be here," the man said, his voice calm, almost kind. "This station doesn't exist." Thomas shivered. "I don't understand," he said. "Why can't I leave?" The man's lips curved in a sad smile. "Because you're not meant to," he said. "This place is for those who can't move on." Thomas's voice cracked. "I'm not dead. I'm not like them." The man tilted his head. "Aren't you?" he asked softly. Thomas stumbled back, shaking his head. "No, I'm alive." The man stepped closer, each footfall measured and deliberate. "Are you?" he said again. Thomas felt the words settle in his chest, heavy and cold. Memories flickered at the edges of his mind. Dark water, cold air, a sudden weightlessness. He closed his eyes, the images coming clearer now. The scream of metal as the train derailed, the shock of impact, the final breath forced from his lungs. He sank to his knees. "No," he whispered. "No, I was going home. I was just tired." The man in the conductor's uniform knelt beside him, a hand resting on his shoulder. "We're all tired here," he said gently. "That's why we stay." Thomas lifted, his head, tears streaking his cheeks. "I don't want to stay," he said. "I want to go home." The conductor's eyes were kind, almost fatherly. "This is home now," he said. Thomas closed his eyes, a sob breaking from his throat. He felt the weight of the station settle around him, heavy and final. He stayed on his knees for a long time, the cold seeping into his bones. When he finally rose, the conductor was gone, and the platform was empty once more. He walked slowly, back to the waiting room, each step an echo of the ones he'd taken before. The man in the stained hat was still there. But now he looked up, his eyes meeting Thomas's with a resigned understanding. "Welcome back," he said softly. Thomas sank into a seat across from him. "What happens now?" he asked. The man shrugged. "We wait," he said. "Some of us forever." Thomas let out a long breath. "I don't even know how long I've been here." The man smiled faintly. "Time doesn't matter here," he said. "You'll forget soon enough." Thomas closed, his eyes, the weight of the truth settling in his chest like lead. The station didn't exist, but it was real. Real enough to trap him, real enough to hold him until the memory of anything else was just a shadow. He opened his eyes and watched the smoke from the man's cigarette curl into the air, twisting and fading into the darkness. The sound of distant footsteps echoed down the platform, but he didn't turn to look. There was nowhere else to go. He let the suitcase fall from his hand. It thudded against the floor, the sound final and hollow. He sat back in the cracked leather seat and closed his eyes, listening to the soft hiss of the coffee machine, the distant hum of voices that never stopped. The station was alive with ghosts of those who couldn't leave, Men who had once believed they could return to the world they'd lost. Now they sat in the flickering light, waiting for trains that would never come. Thomas understood that now. The finality of it, the unending repetition. He could almost hear the station itself breathing around him, a soft, steady rhythm that matched his own slowing heartbeat. He felt his thoughts begin to slip, the edges of his mind growing soft and blurred. Names, places, memories, all of them drifting away like smoke. He let them go, one by one, until only the station remained. He didn't know how long he sat there, eyes half closed, mind drifting. Hours, days, years, it didn't matter. The station was timeless, a place outside the world he'd once known. When he opened his eyes again, he saw the conductor standing in the doorway, watching him with a patient smile. "Are you ready?" the man asked. Thomas hesitated. Then he nodded. The conductor turned, and Thomas followed. Together, they walked down the platform, past the rusted sign and the silent tracks. The mist was thicker now, swallowing the rails and the walls of the station in a soft, endless fog. At the far end of the platform, the conductor stopped. He turned to Thomas and offered a small, understanding smile. "This is the last stop," he said. "Are you sure you want to leave?" Thomas took a deep breath. The air tasted of rust and old smoke, and for a moment he almost turned back, but he forced himself to nod again. The conductor stepped aside and Thomas walked forward into the fog. It closed around him, soft and cold, and for a moment he felt weightless. Then he stepped through. He opened his eyes to find himself standing on another platform. It was almost identical to the one he'd just left. Same cracked benches, same flickering lights. But something was different. He couldn't quite place it, but it was there, in the air, in the hush of distant footsteps. A man sat on a bench nearby, head bowed, a suitcase at his feet. He looked up as Thomas approached, and for a moment, their eyes met. "Where am I?" the man asked softly. Thomas felt a strange calm settle over him. He knew the answer now. "You're at Alder's Hollow," he said. "This is where we wait." The man's eyes widened, and Thomas saw the same fear he'd felt not long ago, but he said nothing more. He sat down beside the man and closed, his eyes the station breathing around him, a heartbeat in the darkness. He knew he would wait there forever, or at least until he forgot he was waiting. The station didn't exist, but it was real enough. And for those who found themselves here, it was the only place that mattered. The darkness closed in, soft and final, and Thomas let it take him, a last breath fading into the endless hush of Alder's Hollow.